All right. Welcome to this week's live office hours. Casey, how's it going?
Things are good. Things are good. Yeah, it was chilly in Boston. Weather's heating up. Hopefully, the Red Sox do too. So yeah, we're making strides in the right direction there.
We're always hoping that the Red Sox are doing better. Always.
I am anyway, but that's all right.
Yeah, it's funny. We're having a lot more conversations about Walmart. With the recent launch last week. I jumped into the Walmart Challenge being hosted by Chris Grant and Sarah Ray, and it's funny because they're like, all right, well, tell us all the details that you guys have learned. It's like, it's actually not a ton, which is so funny because everybody's like, oh, Walmart's so different. That's not entirely incorrect. There's a lot of nuances, but it's not more complicated. Like when we look at like what you need to crush it from a repricing perspective on Walmart versus Amazon, the complexity is vastly different. Will that probably evolve over time? I do think so, but I don't know how quite yet. Unless they change like how they do buy box rotations. Like there's a fundamental dynamic there that is vastly different than what it is on Amazon. So there's a lot of things that like they work really well on Amazon. You do it on Walmart, it does nothing for you, and actually it can hinder you. And so we're having a lot of people I know in chat. We've been talking about this, you and I, Casey, where they're like, oh, I want to be able to do the same thing on Walmart as I'm doing on Amazon. It's like you think you do, but the reality of it is it's not going to perform well. That can actually hinder you because you're making the assumption that the buy box basically has the exact same behaviors and dynamics, and that's factually incorrect. And so we're leaning a lot more into education on this front because we can tell there's a lot of misunderstandings, right? So I'm a big fan of this concept called the double. I think it's called the double crux. This came out of the lesswrong.com. Less doing, that's a whole different thing. Less wrong. This was an early format for people to go in and start talking about consciousness, rationality. Eventually it became the doomers, unfortunately, which is sad to see in the AI front. But, there's a lot of good philosophical thinking concepts that they kind of, created or discovered, however you want to put it. And one of those things was, listen, if we're having an argument or we're having a conversation and the first layer of the crux of what your perspective or views is incorrect, that's fine, but I can't correct that if there's another crux beneath that is also incorrect. And so a lot of what what you guys do in support is actually kind of read through the lines and figure out what those cruxes are and then correct the thing. And I feel like a lot of sellers transitioning from Amazon to Walmart have a lot of these layers of cruxes that are really kind of holding them back, and they're not really aware of it right now.
Yeah, and I think that's not surprising, right? I mean, as we know, Amazon has kind of been the main place to be a third-party seller. So it makes sense to kind of take your foundational learnings from that ecosystem and try and translate them over to Walmart. But you are correct. I mean, like we've found and learned in the last, few months, maybe up to a year at this point, as we've been building Walmart functionality, is that there are a lot of similarities, but how, in terms of like, obviously they have a buy box, obviously that rotates depending on a number of factors, but though they have a lot of the same functions, if you will, they don't function the same. So it's kind of like trying to figure that out. I know a lot of folks are anxious for us to provide the maintenance feature on Walmart, where if you become the buy box winner, you raise your price, as that does on Amazon, just to help kind of maximize your margins, bring you closer to any other competitive sellers on that listing. For Walmart specifically, that actually would put you at a disadvantage due to how they operate their buy box. For anyone who may be, on the call and not aware, Walmart operates on what we've been referring to as a wait in line functionality for that buy box, essentially meaning that when you become the buy box winner, you keep that buy box until you either sell out of your inventory, you raise your price, or someone prices below you. So with that being the case, raising your price as the buy box winner is actually not advantageous. It could lead to you losing the buy box. So currently, right now, we don't have that function on Walmart. We're still, exploring ways to try and maximize revenue there. But until there's some change on Walmart's end in that algorithm or logic, right now it is best practices to stay at your current buy box winning price.
I talked a lot about this last night. The way I position this, if you make a mistake on Amazon with your pricing, you fix it, doesn't matter. right? It's like it never happened, right? If I raise your price from 25 to 48, you get taken out of the buy box. You're like, oh, that was too high. Nobody came up with me. Great. Price back down. Like you'll immediately go back into rotation if you're matching, right? Walmart's very different. And so, where the probability, like basically when we look at raising your price, we want the probability of you getting a sale to be super high. The upside with Amazon is it doesn't have to be 100%, right? The threshold's much lower because if you get it wrong, you just correct it and it doesn't matter. There's no, negative thing, right? I can fix it in 30 seconds. The problem with Walmart though, is if I don't have 100%, or let's call it 90% or greater, right? I don't think that you can ever predict 100%, but let's just call it, 90%. Probability that if I raise your price, you will at least retain the buy box. If I don't have that, it's really hard to justify doing it because now I'm trading something. Whereas Amazon, the trade is, okay, for the time that it was raised, you didn't get anything, but you can correct it in 10 seconds. So really, what does that matter, right? It's a negligible amount of time.
Right.
If you're in the buy box and crushing it and you get taken out of the buy box, your wait time is much, much longer. And these are the behavioral things that, I was talking to these sellers last night and I was trying to get them to understand there's a lot of game theory aspects here, right? What we do is very interesting. We actually lean a lot on game theory, psychology. It's not just pure mathematics. That's certainly a large part of it, but we use mathematics to execute on the strategy, if that makes sense, right? Now, what's interesting is if you say, I just want to make more money, great. I can write that on a piece of paper. That's pretty simplistic, right? But if I say, okay, well, how do you want to do that? Well, I'm going to do that by raising my price when it makes sense. Okay, let's define when it makes sense. And let's also have to question, using first principles, if your assumptions that what you're saying makes sense actually does make sense. And then you have to get into the exceptions in that scenario. In technology, we call these edge cases. Nothing is ever black and white. It's always shades of gray. It could be 80% of the time it works really well. Okay, well, what about the other 20%? Can we codify that? Meaning we can clearly define it and then therefore be signal to that is happening and we know exactly what to do in those cases. Now you're going from, handling 80% of the cases to 100%. You can't always do that though. And so you also have to take this second order approach. Okay, well, if I were to do this, what would be the optimal decision that a competitor or even Walmart themselves would do? And so sometimes you're playing this tug of war where it's like, yes, I could do this and it would work. But the second order effect of that may negate 50% of the upside. Therefore, if we're thinking about this from a systems perspective, it actually wouldn't work the way you think it would. I'm going to bring it back home because I know that I'm getting like way the heck up here right now. It's the same concept as shoes look really good for sales until you look at the returns and you're like, oh, it's actually very different, right? It looks super profitable. You look like you're getting so much sales. And then you look at the return rates. You're like, man, I'm barely breaking even on these things. Correct. You have to take that same kind of philosophy when building software. You really have to look at the details and ground everything inside of reality. And a lot of what we do on these platforms is counterintuitive because you have two different perspectives. You have the platform's perspective, which they are incentivizing and optimizing for demand, right? They want the best prices. Well, best prices is always considered the lowest price. You as a seller are incentivized to make more money, which is against the incentive of the platforms. So now we're playing tug of war, right? So this is just one area where you really have to think through what makes the most sense and how much are we willing to trade on either side and win. It's not always 50-50. Sometimes we can go 80 one way or 80 the other way, and it actually can be justified. Really just depends. And so I'm seeing, I think a lot of sellers, especially on Walmart, taking a very simplistic approach because there is a lot less happening. There is a lot less complexity, certainly. But because the dynamics are so vastly different, you necessarily have to pause and rethink through how you think about these platforms, right? You can't just be like, well, here's kind of what I do on Amazon. I'll do the same thing on Walmart. Not necessarily. Sometimes, yes, not all the time. And this is also very much true from a repricing perspective as well. So it is actually very complicated. in reality. And I think part of what we're focusing on as a team right now is like really getting into the weeds and understanding what are those nuances that sellers may not even be aware of, that we can just see emerge through the data, that we can now give you that access to be able to utilize and take advantage of. That is also its own problem, right? You know, when we started with Amazon way back in the day, in 2018, we had bin sellers. So, you know, we kind of already knew a lot of the tricks and hacks that worked, and we've seen more come up throughout the years. Walmart's very different. And so we're having to learn a lot of these things, because it's funny when I talk to all the big Walmart sellers, I'm like, what do you need in terms of a repricing software? What do you need it to do? Every single one of them has told me just match the buy box. It's like, I'm so not used to that world. You know, Amazon's like, well, here's the 5 things I wanted to be able to do. It's like, all right, cool. You know, let's go make it super complicated. Walmart's just not that kind of complicated. It's a different kind of complication. And I know I just word vomited like crazy. I'm still trying to wrap my head about how to like describe these things in a way that is coherent.
Yeah. And I think like the way I've been thinking about it is like on Amazon, there's a lot more complexity overall, you know, more competitive sellers. You're probably managing more listings. There's higher sales velocity, you know, all sorts of different things. But the way that you operate within those complexities is a little bit more black and white. We kind of have a firmer understanding of
there's more
what
known
to do.
Variables. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Whereas though there is far less complexity on Walmart, the way that those things function is more complex than the simple functions on Amazon. Yeah. Hopefully that makes sense. But
and I'll give you a good example of this too, by the way. You know, your price in it for an out of stock offer on Amazon is irrelevant. Doesn't hurt you, doesn't benefit you. Walmart, it does, both ways. So when you're out of stock and not replanning, you actually want to take all your prices to the competitive offer. Why? Because that factors in to your pro badge seller. Or pro seller badge. Sorry, I said that completely wrong. That's crazy to me. So like when you think about it, you're like, that makes no sense, right? Like why should it matter? But the reality is that it does. And so you have to find these subtle things that you as a seller may not be aware of, but we are, and we need to think about how we can, you know, basically set you up for success, even if you're unaware that we're doing it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lot of what we're figuring out right now is these little things that like a lot of people aren't talking about, but we're noticing, and they work, you know? So again, that's one of the things where a good example for Amazon, when we say, hey, when you're out of stock, go to your max price. Why? It doesn't hurt you, right? When you come back into stock, you want to come in higher and then be able to lower down in case the price had increased since you last sold it. Walmart's very different. Now we have 2 states. We have out of stock, not replenning, in which case you should be at the competitive offer. And then we have the out of stock inbound being replenned, in which case you should not be at the competitive offer. You should be at a higher offer, because the short-term amount of time that you're inbound won't hurt you really at all, right? It's a short-term thing. Even if it does lower some kind of value, it's very short-term. You come into stock, it's gone. So it's even stuff like that where it is slightly more complicated, right? There's just different behaviors, right? Both are complicated, just in a slightly different way. In case I know you had some stuff you wanted to kind of share as well.
Yeah, just real quick. Yeah, as we all know, or may not know, actually, this is open office hours. So do please come in with your questions. But I did just want to highlight a couple things in the platform, as we now do support, obviously, Amazon and Walmart. So just a couple tips if you have both types of marketplaces connected, just a couple of simple ways to kind of isolate the marketplaces, whether you're trying to look at just Walmart listings, just Amazon listings, or this first example is going to be if you're just looking at Amazon statistics or Walmart statistics. So this is actually our own account. Right now, we do not have a Walmart marketplace that we're actively selling on. We're really relying on a lot of our partners who are big sellers and have a lot of experience in this space. But if you do have both types of marketplaces connected and you're looking to just look at either Walmart or Amazon statistics, all you need to do is just go to this All Marketplaces tab at the top of your homepage. You can click that, and then you can select that specific marketplace. So as you can see here, we have US and Canada Amazon marketplaces. So if you just want to isolate the performances there, you can select those. obviously doing much better on the US there. But if we were to have Walmart connected, that would show up as an option there as well. And all of the statistics towards the bottom, price updates, buy box percentage units sold, that will change accordingly as you select those different marketplaces. So that's just going to be the best way to get a quick pulse on how things are performing for you at a high level. Getting to the listing management portion of things, you're going to want to go to the listing section, and just a couple filters I wanted to highlight here. If you just want to look at your Amazon listings, you'll want to use this marketplace option here. Here, you'll just select that specific connected seller ID. Right now, we only have one, so that would be the only option. But if you're just trying to look at those Walmart listings, you'll just select this channel filter here, and that will be for your Walmart marketplace. So that'll just be the best way to kind of, just look at your Walmart listings if you're making changes there, or vice versa for Amazon listings. Just wanted to kind of highlight those quick couple functionalities there, just to help speed things up on your own account management, if you will.
Nice. Yeah, I appreciate you covering that. Yeah, what's nice is the way we've done the dashboard, it knows what channels you have added, right? What platform. So if you only have Amazon, you're only going to see, buy box for Amazon. If you only have Walmart, same thing. If you have both, we'll show you the buy box reports for both Amazon and Walmart separately. So it's kind of dynamic based on what you have added there, which is really good. See, dive into some questions here. Love what you're doing, brother. Congrats on getting on with Walmart. Now let's get you on Target. I know it's funny. I've been starting to pay slight attention to Target, mainly because Noah, who's big on Walmart, has been talking about Target quite a lot. He's helping people get on the platform. Target right now feels like Walmart 2 years ago in terms of like some people are doing it, but it hasn't really caught on yet. I'm curious to see how it plays out. And I'm curious to see if they have an API and all these different things, right? It's like, all these newer platforms that, Target's old, obviously, but I would consider them a new platform from a third-party reseller perspective. There's a lot that they still have to figure out on the support for developer side of things. So we also have to choose our timing very well, because there's just gonna be a lot we might not be able to do. But we could also work with them to help them develop out what support, what APIs they need. See, Elam, what is the best strategy to use on Walmart? It's very simple. Match the buy box. I know it sounds crazy. This is what we've been talking about, is on Amazon, there's a lot more complexity, and things are moving so rapidly. Whereas the way Walmart works, at least right now, it's not nearly to that level of complexity. It is get the buy box, own it, sell a bunch of stuff, move on. I think right now, in case I'm curious to get your experience and perspective on this, I kind of see two main strategies. One is your default, which is going to be just match the buy box. Great. The second one is going to be like a liquidation win, in which case you're going to reprice 1 penny to 2 pennies beneath the buy box. That way you're increasing sales velocity and able to pull more of the buy box, and be able to sell faster, right? That's kind of it. But Casey, I'm curious if you've seen anything else.
Yeah, that tends to be what I've been recommending, and what a lot of folks have been looking for, kind of seeing good results with, is starting with that match buy box strategy. I know we talk a lot about our core 3 strategies on Amazon, which is kind of starting with our Maven AI, followed by buy box, followed by liquidation. Currently, we don't have Maven for Walmart. So what I've been essentially prescribing to folks, if they're looking for a similar core 3 strategy setup, is starting with match the buy box as your first strategy. As that inventory starts to age a little bit, or if you just want to be a little bit more aggressive to improve your stats, that's when I would recommend going to that 1 or 2 cent margin below the buy box. And then liquidation, I just recommend bumping that a couple more cents higher, anywhere from 3 to 5 cents. That's typically what I've been recommending to a lot of folks in chat if they're still trying to, simulate those core 3 strategies function on Walmart. The only nuance to that is we do still have the option to reprice differently if Walmart's winning that buy box. Some folks have opted to be a little bit more aggressive on that from the jump. So even on, for example, their match buy box strategy, they're still choosing to price below Walmart by a handful of cents there. But yeah, it is at this time much simpler in terms of general approach on Walmart. So really just focusing on that buy box, we recommend, matching it to start, a couple cents below to be more aggressive. And then if you go to liquidate, just increase by a few more cents. I don't think it makes sense to reprice more than 5 cents below the buy box in any scenario unless you're not seeing your desired results. So that's kind of what I recommend for that liquidation threshold. Obviously, there are nuances between different listings, demand, all those sorts of things. So if you do want to be more aggressive, you can feel free to, but generally what we recommend, match 2 cents below and then 3 to 5 cents for liquidation.
Nice. See, Peter, what's the best way to utilize the Amazon minimum price higher than the buy box data? What's the best way to, Peter, can you clarify that question? I'm not quite yet following.
Yeah, I think he's referring to that filter that we provide that alerts users that their min price is higher than the current buy box winning price.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
In terms of I'll jump into that, Peter, please correct us if we're wrong. But that's always tough. I mean, in that scenario, you really have two options. You can either wait out the competition at that price in hopes that the buy box will come back within your min and max range if they sell out. The other option would be to just lower your min price to be more competitive and stay competitive. Obviously, that's where liquidation settings become pretty important. If you find that, hey, maybe I just made a bad buy, the ideal window for this item being profitable is now passed and I need to liquidate, you may just have to lower those mins to be more competitive there. But that's really just a good pulse check to see, hey, maybe sales are a little bit down. Why might that be? That would be the biggest indicator. As being a repricer, we shouldn't go below your min price. So that's just an indicator that, hey, this is the situation. Might want to look at either waiting it out, pricing a little bit lower, and tweaking those mids there.
And there's two ways to think about that scenario where the buy box is at or below your min values. I would lean on Keepa data for this specifically. You have to really determine if this is a short-term market thing, in which case then you should wait it out. If you see, it's been relatively consistent with the price, and then there's just a weird drop, maybe another seller is liquidating. That's fine. That's a short-term thing. You can see who that is, see how much, units, how many units they have, and then kind of calculate out, okay, I'm going to deal with this for 3 days. It'll bounce back. It's fine. That's the ideal solution. Wait 2 to 3 days, recovers, get back to selling. Nobody cares. The second one is not as ideal, which is the market itself has actually tanked. And what I mean by that is there's a very big difference between a seller liquidating their inventory and a listing tanking. A lot of people think they are both the same thing. They see one seller liquidating, driving the price down. They go, oh, the whole thing tanked. It's not true. Not in a lot of cases, at least. If you see that everybody is going down and you see the number of competitors massively increasing, that basically tells you need to liquidate, because what's happening is basic supply and demand, right? If the demand has not changed, but the supply side has increased 50 to 100%, right? We went from 25 sellers to 50. It's a 100% increase in competition. If we assume everybody's equally weighted on how many units they have, the supply side has also increased by that amount. We can basically assume that the price will have to decrease to balance the supply and demand. If that is the case, then I would say throw on a liquidation strategy, move on with your life. Maybe circle back in a few months. Hopefully it's corrected. So one's a very short-term blip. You wait. The other one is a market correction, in which case you need to actually recover your capital, because you might have to sit on it for 2 to 3 months. And I would rather you sell at a break-even price at worst to get your capital back out, to redeploy it and actually have a profitable ROI for the next 2 to 3 months until it recovers itself. And then you can jump back onto it. All right, let's see. Hello again. I have made a switch to Maven instead of buy box targeting strategy since last office hours call. Wanted to ask you guys, ask if you guys have a preference of what to put in for the min value. It does really come down to you as a seller. This talking about mins with Maven's kind of interesting. They matter, but not in the same way. Here's what I mean. If for a rule-based strategy, if you change your min from 30% to 15%, depending on how it's designed, guaranteed your average profit margin will decrease by some value. just some value greater than 0. Maven's slightly different, where I have tested having 30% ROI, 15% ROI, and 0% ROI. What's interesting is as the number increases, so from 15 to 30%, it actually decreases performance. As the value decreases, it increases performance. So it's counterintuitive. So we have put everything at 0% ROI, and it was completely fine. Am I recommending that you do that? No. But I need you to understand that, because what I'm about to say next might sound counterintuitive without that understanding. We have had sellers, big sellers, right? Moving hundreds of thousands a month in revenue. They switch everything over to Maven and they put it at 30% ROI because that's what they're used to doing with rule-based strategies. Not seeing great performance. We cut that in half. We take it from 30% to 15%. What's interesting is their average profit margin doesn't really decrease, but their sales start to take off again. Now, if we cut it from 15 to 0%, would that still hold true? To some degree, right? You might see some extra performance, but probably negligible amounts for the most part. So with a rule-based strategy, the lower your min, the higher the risk. With Maven, the lower the min, risk doesn't really change. Actually, the inverse is more likely to be the true. As you decrease your min, the performance increases. So it is slightly counterintuitive. So in terms of like preference and what you should set it to, I can't give you a number. Here's what I would say that tends to work well. Take whatever min ROI value you're used to setting with your rule-based strategies that you're comfortable with and have seen good performance with. Take that value and cut it in half and give that to Maven. That usually, like whenever somebody comes to me with issues with Maven, the first thing I look at is their min value. And I tend to want to say, cut it in half. I mean, Casey, correct me if I'm wrong here, but like 70, 80% of the time we do that and it's fine. And like that, that is it.
Yeah, I think that like the main difference is obviously is how they function, with Maven being designed for the balance between profitability and sales velocity.
Yeah.
It does tend to favor the profitability side of things. So the only scenario where I've ever seen Maven go down to your set min price is if your min price is above either the majority of the market or that buy box price.
Yeah.
In which case that min's probably too high anyway, as we've talked about kind of on the filters conversation just a second ago. So yeah, as lowering those mins for Maven, it does improve performance essentially just by providing it with a wider range to both observe data and test different prices. So that's going to be what we recommend. I would definitely echo Dylan's sentiment of taking your typical ROI. Maybe that's 30%, cutting that into 15% on Maven. Obviously, rules-based strategies are a little bit different. There are more scenarios where you could go down to your min, price wars, things like that with a specific seller. But Maven's designed to take that into account. It recognizes when someone's undercutting you and starts to match them as opposed to continuing to drop that price. So there are, for lack of a better term, some safeguards kind of built into Maven's logic to prevent that from happening, which is why we tend to recommend a lower ROI on Maven compared to any of the rules-based strategies there.
Yeah. That was a long-winded way of saying it's kind of different. That's the hard part with what we do, right? It's like, well, there's a lot of context I need to give on this to make it make sense. Otherwise, I just sound completely insane. Let's see what's the Maven strategy around competing with Amazon when they are on the listing? Thank you. Casey, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, and you might have some additional insights here as well, Dylan. So Maven's going to take into account, as we say, a lot of different contributing factors, rather. That's going to be competitive prices, buy box data, sales data, all sorts of different things. It will recognize when Amazon's on the listing, but as we've mentioned, with it focused on profitability and sales velocity, finding that balance, it's not specifically designed to win that buy box. So as we've seen, Amazon will sometimes prioritize themselves in the buy box despite having a less advantageous offer for sellers. So it will operate on game theory, kind of like I just mentioned, where if it finds the primary competition is continually undercutting you, it will start to match their price just to prevent, your margins from being trimmed too thin, from taking the overall price on the listing, a couple other things there. So that will I don't want to say more than likely, but that's probably going to be what happens if Amazon is on that listing and having a decent share of that buy box. You will end up matching them until they rotate to someone else. They sell out their own inventory, whatever that may be. So if you are primarily trying to win the buy box on listings where Amazon's winning it, I'd recommend our rules-based strategy for targeting the buy box. You can set up in the top of the pursuit section specific repricing margins for if Amazon is winning that buy box. So that way you can be a little bit more aggressive to try and improve your chances there. One thing to note, however, Amazon loves to make up their own rules as we play on their playground, if you will. They do frequently issue themselves new seller IDs, meaning that Aura and all other repricing tools
they don't tell us, basically.
Right. It's a way to essentially covertly make them look like a regular seller in the code. Yeah. So one thing to keep in mind there, if you see that happening, send it our way. We'll work on correcting it, but they can always issue themselves another seller ID. But yeah, another long-winded way of saying Maven will probably match Amazon's price. If you want to undercut them, you'll want to go over to a buy box strategy.
Yeah. And to elaborate a little bit more on that, Maven will test what works. So if it matches Amazon and it doesn't rotate the buy box to us, it will then try to beat it and then figure out what value is required to pull the buy box from said competitor, even if it's Amazon. So we're kind of treating everyone as the same. We're not actually just saying like Amazon's different, repriced differently. We're actually saying, well, what works now? Because I've sold on so many listings where I can match them. They'll rotate all day long, play super fair. Other times I've had to be, $1 to $3 beneath them to pull the buy box. So how do you know when that scenario is true? The only way is through testing. So we will actually experiment to figure out what works and then be able to use that to our advantage. So if we find that, sales velocity is really pulling back, we're going to have to beat them to pull some buy box. That's fine too. So we will test it, but we're not explicitly treating Amazon differently in the way you would with a rules-based strategy. Because again, Maven's designed to find a little different optimal path. But to Casey's point, if you're like, I really want to be hyper aggressive against Amazon specifically, in that case, you should switch over to a rule-based strategy and say, if it's Amazon, I want to do X, Y, and Z. You don't always have to do that, is my point. Some listings, it could be 1 cent. You can match and rotate. Other ones, you might need to be $3 to $5 beneath them to pull it off. Rule-based strategies will not allow you to do that because you have to give us a value to go beneath, beneath them. Whereas Maven's going to basically find that value for you and utilize that in a strategic way. So it is slightly different. Let's see here. See, Peter. Yes, I know. Yes, I know. Notice the Amazon minimum price higher than the buy box, always fluctuating. I was thinking about lowering the min's ROI by 2% until that number goes down, but I don't want to change the strategy. Yeah, it's kind of tough. Usually when I see mins around the buy boxes, it typically tells me you have a possible sourcing problem. What I mean by that is either you're not buying aggressive enough where you're not buying enough margin to be able to play with, or number two, the sources of which you're buying your inventory is highly saturated. A good example of this, leads lists are pretty cool. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them. What I have learned from being in the industry is a lot of times these same VAs work at different companies and they trade leads. So you're on a 1 of 10. Only 10 people are going to get on this. You're like, cool. It's only going to be 10 of us max. What you don't realize is they're working at other companies or selling that as a lead. And actually the exposure is 50 people, not 10. And so what happens is it looks great when you're sourcing it, but everybody's sourcing the exact same time. Everybody got the exact same lead at the exact same time. By the time logistics happen and they all get checked in, it'll ramp up to 50. Right. In which case, again, to my previous conversation, when you have a huge ramp up of competition, the price is going to go down. So look at those two things. Either you're utilizing a sourcing method that is very saturated, or number two, you're buying things with not enough margin for the regular fluctuations in the market. So anytime I'm looking at stuff, any kind of product, I'm not looking at current day's price. I don't look at the buy box price today. What I want to do is look at the historics on that, right? I'm going to look at 90 to 180 days, and I want to understand what's the high and low and the average. And then I usually run that math. So I would say, okay, if my buy cost is this, here's the fees. You use a simple FBA calculator. If it goes down to its lowest, what's my downside? I also know my upside. If it goes up to here, because it's possible, it's in the data, what's my upside there? And then what can I basically on average expect? A lot of sellers get stuck looking at like right now's moments buy box and be like, cool, it's super profitable. You don't look at the historical data and be like, actually right now is the exception. It's up 40% and that's not common. So I have seen so many listings when I was doing wholesale that today looked beautiful, but I zoom out and I go, that's not normal. It's at 120 today, but the average is really 98. So I need to assume I will sell around the average. And if it goes up above that, that's gravy, but I cannot assume that it will stay there. It's probably one of those two things, which is causing that to occur, which also kind of is in alignment with what you're saying about potentially lowering your ROIs. Some sellers want to set their ROI at 40, 50, 60% minimum. That's what they want. They don't buy inventory that can facilitate that. You're really buying 15 to 30% ROI items, right? And so, but again, you have to ask yourself, is it a inventory problem or is it a expectations as far as the lowest amount you could get, which is your minimum ROIs? I can't tell you exactly what it is, but I would say take a look at all those things. What's your average ROI in terms of sales? I love doing this with sellers. Let's look at your data, right? Let's go into IL, whatever tool, and let's look at the actual average ROI that you're selling. It doesn't matter what you buy it at. You're buying buffer. And you just know, okay, well, I'm going to buy it at 60% ROI, but I'm probably realistically on average going to be 45 to 50%. There's always this little margin that goes away, right? There's fluctuations of market fees, whatever. But look at your real numbers. And if you're setting it at, let's say 50% minimum ROI, but your actual ROI in sales is 30, your min's way too high, guaranteed. I would jack that thing down to 15%, to be honest. Like that's what I would do. But again, that kind of tells you, okay, well, you can either accept a lower minimum ROI or you can get better at sourcing. I think you should kind of do both. But for a lot of people, I've rarely seen that it's a minimum ROI issue, and more so, this is rational, but you're not buying inventory that can sustain that. So you have to get better at sourcing and finding better products and listings to sell on. We got some long-winded answers. These are some great questions today, by the way, guys. These are awesome. You're asking some really detailed questions. I love this. Glad that our explanation earlier made a ton of sense. That makes me so happy. That's awesome. Yeah. So definitely, in terms of the min for Maven and stuff like that, definitely give it a try. Definitely track your numbers. If you're having any hesitation, concerns, or you're confused, reach out to chat. We're more than happy to take a look and help you out too. So don't feel like you have to do this all yourself. Misha, met Misha at MSC in Miami last week, 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. Just signed up with Aura. Pumped. Happy to have you, Misha, finally. Excited to try the product. Waiting for tomorrow to jump on a call with Finn. Also, it was good to meet in person and talk to you, Dylan, in Miami. Good luck, guys, on your mission. Hopefully I will stick with your repricer. We hope so, too. And if you don't, I'm going to track you down, Misha. I'm just kidding. No, super exciting. It's good stuff. It's nice to go to these conferences and just be able to have real conversations. I think a lot of companies approach these very salesy, just like sign up. And I'm like, no, I just want to hang out, chat, learn about you and like what your problems are and geek out. It's way more fun that way. That's for sure. See, another question. Could you please touch on hyperdrive and what situations where it would be worth turning on? Casey, I'll let you jam on that one.
Yeah, so hyperdrive is definitely one of the more powerful features we provide. That's right now exclusive to Aura. There's no other repricers that offer hyperdrive, but essentially, this might be another two-tiered longer answer, but to just educate here, what's considered instant repricing by Amazon is 90 seconds to 2 minutes. That is what they consider instant repricing for submitting a price update to them for them to then process it and reflect it on the actual listing page. What Hyperdrive does is it cuts that submission time from that 1.5 to 2 minute mark down to 10 seconds or less. So that just allows you to issue updates more quickly on listings where you have it active. But one clarifying point there is it won't increase the number of updates you make, but this will increase the speed at which they are made. So if you have a strategy, you're one of 2 sellers on a listing and you have Hyperdrive active, there won't be more pricing updates because there's lower pricing activity, or is still going to price based on your strategy settings and your competition. So due to that, we do recommend having it active on listings where there is a lot of pricing activity or a lot of competitors. That'll just give you the biggest advantage over all of the other sellers on that listing by being able to respond and issue those updates more quickly. Additionally, we always recommend using all of your Hyperdrive credits. There's different credits allotted per plan, and there's no disadvantage to having it active on a listing. So always use all of them. We're exploring different ways to have them be on some sort of autopilot feature where you won't have to manage them manually. They'll kind of rotate based on listings that may have the most competition. But for now, definitely recommend using it on all of your listings that have a lot of competition and using all of those credits there.
Nice. Let's see. I also have a Boxhome integration turned on with Aura. Other than pulling by costs, is there other data that is being exchanged, and what benefits are there to the integration? So that's all we're pulling from them is the buy box, or I'm sorry, is your cost. The benefit of that is, in order to reprice, Aura requires 3 things. We require a min value, repricing toggled on, and a strategy assigned to that listing. The min value, we tend to recommend that it is calculated automatically using your strategy. And you're going to say, hey, I want 15, 20, 30% ROI. Great. In order to calculate that, we need your costs. Now, cost is important not only for calculating mins and maxes automatically, but also getting you as accurate data for the analytics side of what Aura does. So if you're looking at that dashboard, we can actually show you, cool, here's your gross profit actually. Otherwise, you're missing a lot of data and you think you're doing good, but you don't really know, right? It's one of those things where, yes, seeing the bar go up in terms of sales is great, but you also want to understand what that profit margin actually looks like. And so we can actually show you that on the analytics. So what's nice about that integration and any of our integrations is you do it one time, new listing comes in. I would urge you to have a workflow which states whenever a new listing is imported into Aura, do 2 things: assign a strategy, your starting strategy, and enable repricing. What's cool about that is the moment that shipment is created, we're usually within 5-10 minutes, we're able to grab that listing from Seller Central, add that to your account. Now it has 2 of the 3 things it needs, but you have the integration enabled as well. So that third thing comes in. And so basically it's queued up, which is so nice because let's say it gets checked in and set live at like 3 o'clock in the morning. It's already repricing. You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to remember, oh, that's live now. Let me go enable and set all these things up. It's already done. And so we're huge fans of automating as much of the administration of your account as you can. If you're spending 2+ hours a day in your repricing software, you're missing out. And you're missing out on sourcing more inventory, which is where you make your money, right? It's like, how do you scale Amazon? Buy more inventory. That's it. So the integrations are simple in terms of what we do, but they allow you to do things that are way more impactful in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. So that's how you kind of want to think about integrations within Aura right now. Peter, glad to hear that. That's great. I think it's sourcing. A lot of times this is the case. It is a sourcing issue. This is why I just said what I just said, which is you make money when you buy inventory, right? Our job is not to create a software that gives you another task or job to complete yourself that takes you away from sourcing. Ideally, you want these systems set up, and the way we've been so heavily pushing on education lately is with these frameworks, these automations and things like that, is if you can understand this foundational knowledge that we've been teaching and understand how to implement it inside of Aura, which is very simple, by the way, you freed up a ton of your time and you're probably ahead of, I would argue, 60 to 70% of sellers. and you're doing less work, right? So you're getting more performance, you're doing less work, you freed up more of your time. That time now needs to be spent either sourcing more. So let's say, as a skill, right? Let's call this a skill, sourcing as a moment. Let's say you're an 8 out of 10 on sourcing. Great. You should spend your time becoming more efficient at it, right? So can you go from sourcing, let's just call it 10 units an hour as an example, to 50 units an hour? Great. The value of your time just went through the roof. Or can you build a team now that you have a good system? Can you go train a team to go from 10 units an hour to 120 units an hour? That's the best high value use of your time. But let's also assume maybe you're a 2 out of 10, right? You're like, I'm just getting started. I kind of struggle with it. Fine. What you need now is time to go from a 2 to a 3 to a 4 to an 8. But that takes repetition. And so if you're spending so much time managing the work that's already been done, right? You already sourced the inventory. Now you're micromanaging all these little things. Like, I'm going to go down 1 cent here, I'll go up 1 cent here. You are now trading hundreds, if not thousands of dollars of value of your time per hour to pennies. A lot of sellers don't realize this. They're like, well, I like to micromanage it. I want to be in the weeds on it. That's fine. But you have to understand and accept the fact that you are trading that hour for something less valuable. Opportunity cost is not just your capital. We talk a lot about this concept. If you leave capital tied up into inventory too long, there's an opportunity cost, meaning the option B would be to take that capital out with 0 ROI and re-spend it on profitable ROI items and make more money. Same thing is true for your time, right? So the opportunity costs, where you're spending countless hours micromanaging and being in the weeds on your repricing software, is actually sourcing more inventory. So when people are like, oh, I'm struggling to scale, let's look at your time. And it's like, oh, I spend a ton of time, sourcing. Like, okay, let's look at it. And eventually you realize, oh, you're actually sourcing 2 hours a day. We have 6 hours available. What are you doing with the others? And it's like, oh, I'm doing administration and operations. Like, no, you're not. Like, you feel like you're being productive, but the reality is you're not. And so we've tried to build features and functionality to not require that. You still can if you want to. I just don't recommend it. But our whole goal is, how do I free up more of your time and give you more performance? It is just once that clicks in your brain, you start to operate very, very differently.
Yeah, and not to like oversimplify it. One thing that's funny is a lot of folks, to oversimplify a general question, is like, how do I be more competitive on my listings? The way you be more competitive is you have a lower min price, to oversimplify it again.
Yes.
And how do you get a better min price? You make a better sourcing decision. So it all does come back to sourcing. That's where repricing just automates as much of it as possible for you. Right. So you can invest that time back into sourcing, and then it kind of feeds itself as you make better buys. Your reprice is going to make you more money. As you make more money, you continue to reinvest it. Ipso facto.
Repricing is a multiplier, an amplification of the quality of your inventory. The higher the quality, the better you're going to reprice, right? And so to Casey's point, how do you be competitive? You make the $20 buy box your 60% ROI and your competitor's ROI 30%, meaning you had a lower buy cost. And how do you do that? You manufacture profitability. There's a lot of different methods of doing that. You find better sourcing methods. There's all kinds of stuff. And so a lot of people, it's actually, it's funny. I'm so glad you mentioned this, Casey, because I've always said that we as sellers assume our data is our competition's data. And I've said this in a different light before, of like, somebody took the buy box from 30 to 24 and people are like, oh, this guy's an idiot. How do you know that? Well, he's not making any money. How do you know that? You don't know his buy cost. His buy cost could be a quarter of what yours is. Well, that's not possible. Is it? Maybe. I don't know. But the reality of it is, have you tried to solve the problem? Right? Did you really try to get the best price possible? Did you get creative with it? So he might actually be making way more than you in terms of ROI and dollars at 24. And he's, by the way, owning the entire market and selling through it like hotcakes. So you're like, oh, he's losing money. He doesn't know what he's doing. Maybe he knows more than you do. And that is a massive competitive advantage. He doesn't need to go to 32. He's like, I mean, yeah, I'd make more money, but then I'd have to compete with you guys. Why compete when I can just own the whole thing? Wow. Okay. So we really have to take a very different mindset perspective shift here. And I feel like the more sellers that do that, they start to uncover creative strategies that fundamentally change their businesses. I love asking the impossible questions, right? How do I make processing 30,000 units a month as easy as 30 units a month? That's what I did with wholesale. I got into wholesale. I'm like, okay, the difference to me is I add a few more zeros to my PO. It's not more of my work. I'm not prepping it. Doesn't matter. So to me, in terms of the workload, is the exact same, right? But also ask yourself, how could I cut my buy costs in half? It's not that you should have an answer. It's that you're priming your brain to solve a very difficult problem. And now you're looking for solutions. It's the whole, punch buggy philosophy that happens, right? Whenever you're buying a new car and you kind of know what you want, you tend to notice them and see them a lot more, right? Definitely. The statistics of them hasn't changed. The same amount of cars have been there. You just haven't seen them because you haven't primed your brain to look for them. But if you're looking all the time on the internet, CarMax, whatever, and you're like, that's the one, you're going to see them everywhere. It's the same number of things. It's just now you're opened up to it and you're focusing on it. Same thing happens with problems. If you focus on the problem and just tune your mind into it, just keep it top of mind, eventually you find solutions. It's the exact same thing, which that kind of makes life a fun little game of just like, so now I've gotten to a point where it's like, what's the craziest questions I can ask? Maybe I don't find an answer, but like, I have nothing to lose. Like, oh no, I didn't find an answer to a question. How horrible, right? But what if I do? And enough times I have found the answer. And I'm like, oh, that's actually really interesting. I didn't know that was possible. And it opens up your mind quite a lot. And so I think in business, that's very, very important, especially in the Amazon, Walmart selling kind of industry where you kind of have to be somewhat creative. Now you can build a decent business just doing the routine stuff that everybody else is doing. But the guys that are scaling, they're getting, I have conversations with a lot of these people behind the scenes and they tell me stuff and I'm like, dude, how did you get to that? And like, don't tell anybody, please. I'm like, no, of course not. But like, how did you get there? They're like, solve the problem. Wow. So it's good stuff. I got the Operation Amazon guys. How's it going, boys? I basically, you just DM'd me back. I'm scheduling a recording with them on Twitter right now. Yeah, Peter, the Who Not How. Love that. Dan Sullivan. If you like the Who Not How, Dan Sullivan stuff, check out the oh my gosh, why can't I think of it now? It's Dan Martell's book that recently came out. I'm blanking on the name of it now. Great book. It's his only book, just Dan Martell book. You'll find it.
Yeah, I can see the cover in my head, but I can't think of it.
I know it's blue. Oh my god, The Replacement Ladder. Oh my gosh.
Just Google it.
Delegate something. Yeah, Google it for me.
Buy back your time.
Buy back your time. There it is. That's a good one. Yeah, Peter. I'm going to go on a slight rant here because we got a few more minutes. This whole 10x thing. Love the love the theory, right? You take your goal, you want to 10x it. I hate that there are whole books, like 200 plus pages of a book that basically tells you, take your goal, multiply it by 10. I remember reading this by Grant Cardone, and I was just like, "Are you serious?" This was a whole book. This is a Twitter post. Now I get the whole, psychologically how it's different and it makes you think exponentially and blah blah blah. I get that. Those are footnotes. So interesting to me that people can write a book and extrapolate a simple one sentence thing, which is good by itself, to 100 something plus pages. I was like, why? What? I'm not reading that book. I get the concept. I can Google that. That's fine. And listen, I'm a big reader, love books. But there is the whole concept of most books should have been a blog post and most blog posts should have been a Twitter post. there's a lot of cases where I'm like, that was a tweet. That I spent $18 in like a few hours of my time reading this whole book. My gosh. Love it. Let's see here. Oh, nice. Sorry, I wanted to pre-read this. Get some details on it. Love this. Okay. Aura Dude. Love that. Quick testimonial for you. I had switched my repressor from Aura to a free version to save money. We've been talking about this a lot. I ran the other repressor for 2 months and kept tweaking it, hoping it could be good enough. Nope. It cut my sales in half, 100K in Jan on Aura to 50K in both Feb and March on the other repressor. Then back up to 100K in April once I had switched back to Aura. Needless to say, I will be staying with Aura. I definitely lost out on more money than I saved. Thank you for Aura for being legit and actually push. Yeah, this is something we've been talking about a lot. You know, we use the term opportunity cost quite often as a company, because it's such a good framework for how to think about, you know, if I make decision A, what am I trading that I could have done with decision B, right? There's always a trade-off here. And a lot of sellers, I think right now, are understandably cost sensitive in a lot of ways. And, you know, especially being a new seller, you might be like, well, I'm going to go over here because it's cheap. The issue is you don't understand how much performance you're giving up. And repricing is a very interesting thing. It's one of actually, it's the only software that can pay for itself. All the other software, you actually have to go and use it. You still have to do the work. Repricing doesn't make you do the work. We do the work for you. That's the whole point. And a lot of sellers don't understand. Yeah, you might save, you know, $30, but what you don't realize is it's actually costing you a ton of profit in sales. And so you traded $30 a month for negative $5,000 a month in sales. Doesn't sound like a good trade. And a lot of sellers that have been doing this, we talk a lot internally about this. A lot of people are coming back that have, you know, had that perspective where like, oh, you know, money's kind of tight right now. I'm just going to go somewhere cheaper. And they're like, wasn't even worth it. Like, it cost me more than what I thought I was saving. What the heck? I'm back, you know? And so we see this time and time again. And I get it. I've been a seller. I know how easy it is, especially for new sellers, to go from, I got my first 10 units in there, and now you're like, how am I spending $1,500 a month on subscriptions right now? Like, because you're told all the time, here's all the software I use, but those people are doing millions of dollars a year of revenue. You don't obviously need the same level of technology and software that they have to get started, you know, where you're currently at your level. But there are a few things that if you don't use the right software or the right platforms, it will hurt you. Unfortunately, that's just the name of the game. That's just how our industry somewhat operates. There is quality software, and then there is non-quality software that can actually hinder and slow your growth down. You want to be looking at amplifiers. What are things you can add to your business that when you do so, it speeds up how fast you can grow and scale and sell things, and obviously free up your time. So appreciate that, Aura Dude. So here's another one. Listen, I used to be on Inform.co, which was pricier than Aura, and I got way better results with Aura. So that's the cool part. I don't want to be the most expensive. I also don't want to be the cheapest, because there are consequences of both. If I'm the cheapest, that means I can't afford to hire and pay amazing people on our team. We have to outsource everything at that point, which sucks. And you get bad quality software and support. On the flip side, if we're very expensive, that means the average seller now does not have access to us. They can't afford it. And so I'm explicitly telling new sellers, you have to earn the right to use us. I've been a new seller. I've experienced that before. That doesn't work. And I think it's the wrong play. For us, we want to be the best ROI, the best actual return on how much you pay us. That's it. So again, tug of war. You got to find that middle ground, right? Super important. Let's see, Angelica, where do I ask about account issues like getting into account? If you have any issues, Angelica, if you go to goaura.com, there's a blue icon in the bottom right of every single page. Click that, start a new message, and just reach out to support. Let us know what's going on, and we will get you sorted out as quickly as we can. Awesome. So I think that's going to be it for today. We're kind of at the time mark here on the hour. Appreciate everybody making the time to ask some amazing questions, by the way. I like these in-depth. We got to really like walk you guys through it. That's fun for us. Really makes us think and have to clarify how we explain things, which is a good thing for us too. With that, this is weekly office hours. So we do this every Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. EST. There is no format. All we want to do is make this the highest value hour of your time answering your questions and making sure that we can help you along your journey as a seller. So with that, we will let you get back to the rest of your week. Enjoy it.
Have a good week, folks.